Thanks, Miles. Well, I've been given the warning about acronyms. I have to say most of the meetings I go to with HMRC and other trade bodies, they sound like an American football commentary with all the different terms being thrown out. I think there are a number of good reasons why we should be still talking about no deal, despite what's been negotiated in Brussels over the last few days. We conceivably face a no deal at the end of October, depending on how things work out in the House of Commons in the next few days. We conceivably face a no deal at the end of January if the Ben Act comes in, but we get an extension to the end of January. Even if we have a deal now and a transition period until the end of December 2020, we conceivably face a no deal then if government is unable to negotiate some sort of free trade agreement with the European Union at that point. So there's a number of scenarios where no deal is still potentially relevant, and none of the knowledge that you've acquired over the past few months and years, or that you might acquire today, is going to be wasted. It's all going to be relevant. Even if a deal is made and we manage to negotiate a free trade agreement, a lot of the mechanisms that HMRC have devised over the last few months are still going to be relevant, because the customs treatment of goods moving in and out of the UK is going to change with Brexit. So again, the various mechanisms, the various ways of thinking about customs arrangements are all going to be good and useful knowledge over the coming months and years, because what is absolutely certain is that any deal that we get now is only the beginning of negotiations. There will be an almost permanent state of negotiation with the EU in a new trading arrangement as its economy moves on, as our economy moves on, whatever direction those moves might be in. There is going to be an almost permanent state of negotiation with our nearest trading neighbours. So again, the knowledge that we have now and the knowledge that we gain in the weeks and months to come about how customs treats the movement of goods, and in particular the movement of beverage alcohol and the machinery required to produce it, that's all going to be vital knowledge. So I want to spend, hopefully not too long, 10 minutes or so, just reminding everybody about what the current system looks like, so we can all go, oh, isn't that lovely and simple? But just as the starting base of knowledge, I know that some people in the room who are part of the logistics and supply chain community will be very, very familiar with this. There are some in the room, perhaps from the buying and marketing or management side of the industry, who are not necessarily as familiar with this. So it doesn't hurt to remind ourselves of it. And I think the other thing we ought to bear in mind is that there is an aspiration to keep this. Quite some time ago, I was at a session with HMRC where they said, if we're negotiating a free trade agreement, we would like to be in a position where we negotiate continued access to current arrangements for trading excise goods. Whether that comes to pass, I don't know. None of us know. But it's a relatively simple position at the moment. We use the Excise Movement and Control System, EMCS, and it's an EU-wide system. It's been running now for, I think, about 6 or 7 years. It's an electronic system, and it's got some very simple stages to it. These will be more obvious on the slide pack when they come out to you. But in very simple terms, the warehouse of dispatch puts an electronic message into the system to say these goods are going to go from Bordeaux to Barking. That message of dispatch generates a number. It's an administrative reference code. It's called an ARC number. And that ARC number is what the driver of the lorry, if it's a road transport, has to have with him. He can have it written on the commercial documentation. He can have it on a text on his phone. But that's the only piece of information that's needed to identify the goods. The lorry then drives onto a ferry, probably with no checks, drives off at the other end, probably with no checks. If it is checked, all that's produced is the ARC number. And then when the vehicle gets to Barking and is unloaded, the warehouse keeper of receipt plugs the ARC number into the system, generates another message that says this load has been received. And that's it. It's then sitting in somebody's account in a warehouse. When they want the goods, they then pay the excise duty, account for the VAT, and move on. It really is that straightforward. We will see later what it will change to under a system where we're making import and export declarations. But to get product around the EU, that's what we do. Now, of course, when I say it's straightforward, I don't actually mean it's straightforward, in that there's quite a lot of information and material that goes into that. So the electronic administrative document, the little EAD that's produced, it has in it quite a lot of information. The trader already has to be registered on the system to be able to use it. You can't just download an app and start using it. They have to be registered, and they have to put in a whole raft of information about the goods that are going. None of this should cause anybody any surprises, because commercially it's pretty obvious. What are the goods? Where are they going from? Where are they going to? How long do you think it's going to take? Which vehicle are you going to use? What's the commodity code of the goods? There's a whole list of things, and I've just put an extract on the slide for you of the sort of things that you would expect to find in an electronic administrative document. But they're nothing that would cause anybody any great pain or surprise. Of course, reality doesn't always work that way, because if we take the lorry transport example again, a lorry might break down and change the vehicle. The transaction might take longer than is necessary because there's a traffic jam somewhere. A driver might run out of hours and have to change vehicle, or it might be a groupage load and you have to consolidate consignments in a warehouse at some stage of the journey. So there's all sorts of alarms and excursions that can happen along the way, but the basic proposition about what goes in the documentation is relatively straightforward, and I don't think there's anything in there that anybody would find particularly surprising or shocking. That's what an administrative reference code looks like. If there's anybody in the room who can identify which consignment this is from, then well done. The only thing that tells me anything is that the letters ES tell me that this is a movement from Spain. But otherwise, I think I've managed to anonymise the document quite successfully. And as I said earlier, when you get to the warehouse of destination, that's the point where the goods are taken into stock, given a rotation number within the warehouse, and the EMCS movement is happily discharged. Of course, with anything involving customs, excise, HMRC, if you get it wrong, there's a duty point created, and the duty point becomes payable, and HMRC will tend to assume that the loss occurred in the country where the relevant message failed to be sent. So if you fail to complete the message of discharge on your movement, then HMRC will assume that the goods were not accounted for in the UK, and they will charge UK excise duty rates rather than French duty rates. So there's quite a powerful incentive to get it right, particularly if you're dealing in bulk goods and particularly if you're dealing in bulk spirits. So big incentive to get the EMCS system working properly. And of course, when you move goods, HMRC work on a general principle that they will never be out of pocket, whatever. So there has to be a movement guarantee. This is separate from the warehouse keeper's premises guarantee, and HMRC will expect there to be a movement guarantee. There are rules about who can give movement guarantees. There are rules about how big the movement guarantee has to be, but essentially, if you have a decent trading record, you can sequentially and progressively reduce the amount of guarantee that you have to give over a period of time, and you have to go and get your bank or another finance sector provider to give you a guarantee. You have to pay for this, and they generally treat it as hard lending. So it is a cost to business and a fairly frequent source of angst from WSTA members. Why do I have to cough up for such a large guarantee? Because HMRC won't be out of pocket is the answer. So guarantees are an integral part of the EMCS. So it comes out of a warehouse where there's a premises guarantee. It's covered by a movement guarantee while it's on the road. And when it gets to a warehouse at the other end, there's a premises guarantee there as well. So that was reasonably painless. That's how it works in the EU. Those of you who do that on a day-to-day business will know that the practice rarely works out quite as simply as that. But the basic principle is relatively straightforward. For the next part of the session, I'm going to ask Ed Baker, who's the MD of Kingsland Drinks, to come and talk to you a bit about what Kingsland does in terms particularly of bringing product in from the rest of the world, third countries, what we're going to be after Brexit. And I know that Ed's going to say something about Kingsland place in the market on that as well. So Ed, over to you.